The first necklace was beautiful, a delicate gold chain with a tiny sapphire pendant. I was 23, newly married, and still dazzled by the way he looked at me like I was a secret he'd been waiting to unlock. He gave it to me on our first anniversary. No card, no long speech, just a kiss on the cheek and a quiet, "I saw this and thought of you." I remember laughing. "You thought of me as a sapphire?" He shrugged. "You're rare." I wore it every day for a year. Back then, everything was new. The house we'd just bought still smelled like paint and hope. We were still learning each other's habits, the way I curled to the right side of the bed, the way he always left one sock on the floor, no matter how many times I asked. It was messy, but it was ours. Year 2, another necklace. Gold again, this time with a small rose charm. "Because you're softer than you pretend to be," he said, brushing a thumb along my collarbone. "You bloom in quiet ways." By year 5, I had 5 necklaces. All gold, all simple, all different. He never asked if I liked them. I never asked why he kept giving them. It became a ritual. The small blue box, the same navy ribbon, the way he'd hand it to me, never wrapped in flashy paper, never hidden or surprised, just handed directly, like a transaction. But his eyes always lingered as I opened it. I thought it was love. I thought maybe he wasn't good at words, but this was his way of keeping track, of showing me we were still okay. 17 years, 17 necklaces. I kept them all. They lived in a drawer lined with soft velvet. I didn't wear them much after the early years, but I never gave them away. I never could. They weren't just jewelry. They were timestamps. Each one held a year, a silence, a season. The necklace with the tiny leaf pendant, that was the year we lost the baby. The one with the pearl drop, the year his father died. The one with the empty gold circle, the year I almost left. Sometimes I'd take them all out and line them up on the bed. 17 thin chains, 17 versions of me. But I never noticed the pattern until the 17th. That morning, he'd left the box on the kitchen counter. No note, just the box. Our daughter had already gone to school. The sun was barely up. I stood there, bathrobe tied loosely around me, holding that familiar velvet in my hand, and something inside me paused. I waited to open it. I brought it upstairs, sat on the bed, placed it in my lap. I think part of me already knew. I untied the ribbon slowly. The necklace was gold, as always, but this one was different. The pendant was a small key, a key. It caught the light in a way that made it look older than it was. I picked it up, held it by the chain, watched it swing gently in the morning light, and then I saw the note, tucked beneath the box. Not inside it, behind it, hidden, folded so precisely it looked like part of the packaging. But I know my husband. Nothing he does is accidental. My hands shook. I didn't know why. It was just a note. But my breath caught in my throat before I even unfolded it. The paper was thick, cream-colored. His handwriting, always neat, always slanted slightly to the right, filled the page. But it didn't begin with my name. That was the first sign. It began with, "I know I shouldn't write this." Not "Dear Emily," not "My love," just that. I read the first line 3 times. Then I unfolded the rest of the page and kept reading. And that was the moment everything changed. I read the letter 3 times before I could breathe properly. The words blurred in and out of focus, but I forced myself to keep going, even as my pulse pounded in my ears. It wasn't long, just a few paragraphs, but it said more in a handful of lines than he'd told me in years. "I know I shouldn't write this," it began, "but I have to put it somewhere, even if no one ever reads it, even if she does." I froze at that sentence. She, not me, not Emily, not my wife, just she, he went on. "I never planned for it to go this far. At first, it was just an accident, a conversation that became a habit, then a secret, then a second life." My stomach turned. I told myself it didn't mean anything, that I could keep both worlds apart. But I've been lying. To you, to her, to myself. The rest of the page was apologies. No names, no specifics, just grief, just cowardice. "I give her something too," he wrote at the end. "But not necklaces. That's just for you. You were always the one I measured time by." I dropped the letter like it burned. The necklace in my lap, the key, now looked like a joke, a twisted metaphor, a final, cruel riddle. A key to what? To the life he lived when I wasn't looking, to the doors I never dared to open. I sat there for what felt like hours. The box, the note, the necklace, and all the years rushing back at once. I remembered every anniversary, every small box, every quiet kiss, every time I told myself, at least he remembers. But now I wondered, was he remembering me? Or was he trying to forget her? I didn't confront him that night. I didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't hold up the note like a weapon. I made dinner. I asked about his day. I kissed him goodnight, because I needed time. Time to understand who I had been married to for 17 years, and time to decide who I was now. The next day, I opened the drawer where I kept the necklaces. I pulled them out one by one. Year 1, the sapphire. Year 2, the rose. Year 3, a small oval with an engraving I never understood. Just a date, 3 years before we met. Had I missed it all along? Was there a code? I started cataloging them, photographing each one, taking notes like a detective in my own life. I noticed strange patterns. The year I miscarried, he gave me a dove pendant. Peace, I thought at the time. But what if it meant something else? That same year, I remember he was gone a lot. Late meetings, he said. I cried alone in bed for weeks. He held me, sure, but his eyes were elsewhere. Year 10, the black onyx bead. A strange choice. I'd asked him why. He shrugged. It felt honest. I let that answer go. I shouldn't have. Now I wondered if it was a marker, a signpost for something I didn't yet understand. I pulled out the old planner from that year, scrolled through notes, dinners, school meetings, vacations. He missed our anniversary that year, said he was in Phoenix on business, but I'd found the necklace on the kitchen table the next morning. No note. I called his office. The receptionist said he was still in town. I'd forgotten that, until now. How much had I let go? How many lies had I rewrapped with ribbon and called devotion? The next morning, after he left for work, I went digging. Not with anger, with precision. I opened drawers I'd never thought twice about. Checked jacket pockets, bookshelves, shoeboxes, nothing. Until I found the second note. It was in the garage, taped to the underside of his toolbox. This one was longer. I never meant to love two people, he wrote. But you were safety. She was escape. I stopped breathing. I wanted to leave a long time ago, but I couldn't. Not after the miscarriage. Not after she gave me the same ultimatum your eyes gave me, but without saying a word. He said her name once. Mara. I didn't recognize it. Not a colleague, not a neighbor, not a friend. I wondered how long she'd been in our lives without me knowing. There were no photos, no receipts, just this note, and the 17 necklaces, tokens of guilt, distractions, breadcrumbs. I held them differently now. They felt colder, heavier, like metal forged from silence and avoidance. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. I walked around the house like I was in someone else's story. Touched walls I'd painted, chairs we'd bought, photos that now felt curated. He came home that night and kissed me like always, and for the first time, I pulled away just a little. Not enough for him to notice, just enough for me to feel it. The first boundary, the first breath of air between who I had been and who I might still become. The thing about secrets is that once you find one, the silence around it starts to make noise. In the days that followed, everything he did seemed louder, sharper, even normal things. The way he asked what was for dinner, the way he hummed while brushing his teeth, the way he said good morning like he always had. Suddenly I was listening for subtext, for clues. I couldn't hear him without wondering, did he say the same thing to her? Did he hum the same tune in someone else's bathroom? It was like living with a ghost who didn't know he was dead. I didn't sleep much. At night, I replayed conversations from years ago. Tiny throwaway lines now thudded with new meaning. I'll be late tonight. She just needed someone to talk to. You worry too much. Had he been telling me the truth the whole time, just in a way I wasn't ready to hear? Our daughter, Grace, didn't notice anything. She was 15, orbiting in her own world of tests and friends and TikToks. But sometimes I caught her watching me, her brow furrowed, like she was trying to solve a puzzle she didn't know existed. I kept the notes hidden in a worn recipe box under the bed. I started writing my own, not to him, to myself. Fragments mostly. Check year 11 again. The bird pendant. Call Mara? No. Wait, not yet. Was I ever the only one? One morning, while folding laundry, I found a receipt in the pocket of his jeans. A dinner, 2 entrees, wine, dessert. From a place I'd never been. The date matched our 16th anniversary. That night, he'd brought home the necklace with the moonstone. I remember him saying, I wanted to get you something luminous. I had cried then, because I thought he still saw me. Now I think he saw guilt, and he covered it in jewelry. By week 2, I had mapped the necklaces to major events in our marriage. I kept a spreadsheet on my laptop under the name Recipe Experiments. Column A, year. Column B, pendant. Column C, major event. Column D, notes, suspicions, inconsistencies. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe a pattern. Maybe proof I wasn't crazy. Year 7's necklace, a gold knot, had come the same week he forgot our daughter's school recital. He'd said he was out of town, but I remembered the car in the driveway when I left that night. A knot. Tangled truth. I started Googling Mara with combinations of his workplace, conferences, old address books. Hundreds of hits. None that felt right. Until one night, I saw a blog comment. Thanks for the beautiful gift, Jay. You always know how to make ordinary days feel like anniversaries. M. Dated 4 years ago. Posted under a lifestyle blog that sold handmade jewelry. I clicked the user profile. Mara Penfield. Lives in Boston. Age 38. No children listed. Profile photo. A soft smile. Shoulder-length auburn hair. wearing a gold necklace with a delicate swallow charm. I felt my blood go cold. Year 13. The same swallow necklace sat in my drawer. That year, he had given me the exact same design. I checked my spreadsheet, confirmed the date, matched the receipts. He hadn't designed them himself. He had bought them in pairs, one for each of us. Somehow, that hurt more than the affair. It wasn't just betrayal. It was laziness, carelessness, like he couldn't even be bothered to lie well. I stared at her photo for a long time. She looked happy, not glamorous, not dangerous, just soft, familiar. I wondered what he told her about me, that I was cold, that I didn't understand him, that we were just roommates. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark. I didn't know what to do with this information. I wasn't ready to leave, but I couldn't stay the same. The next morning, I put on one of the necklaces. Year 4, a gold disc with my initial. I hadn't worn it in over a decade. When he saw it, he smiled. "Haven't seen that one in a while," he said. I smiled back. It felt like the right time. I wore a different one every day after that. Not for him, for me. Each one was a chapter, a version of myself I needed to revisit. Year 6, when I went back to school. Year 8, when I found out about his second checking account. Year 12, the year I started sleeping in the guest room because of his snoring. They weren't just jewelry anymore. They were language, and I was learning to read it. On the 17th day, I wore the key. He noticed. His face flickered. "You like that one?" I nodded. "It's growing on me." He didn't ask any more questions, and that told me everything I needed to know. There's a moment in every unraveling when silence becomes heavier than truth. For me, that moment came 3 days after I found Mara's profile. He was in the shower. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, the browser still pointed to her blog post, the photo of her smiling in that swallow necklace. I zoomed in. The clasp was slightly different from mine. Smaller, more delicate. He hadn't just bought 2 of the same. He'd personalized them. The thought hit me like a bruise. He had paid attention to her in a way he no longer paid attention to me. I didn't cry. I felt cold, quiet, like my skin didn't quite belong to me. That day, I started writing the speech I would never give. Not a confrontation, I wasn't ready, but a confession. To myself. I wrote, "I am not blind. I am not weak. I am not collateral damage in someone else's love story." Then I closed the laptop and went upstairs. He came out of the shower, towel slung low, humming something tuneless. He smiled. "You okay?" And I said the truest lie I've ever told. "I'm fine." Later that night, I picked one necklace, the simplest one, a tiny gold bar. I wore it to dinner. We sat across from each other, grilled chicken and roasted carrots between us. I watched his eyes move from my face to the pendant and back again. "You're wearing them a lot lately," he said. I smiled. "They're starting to make sense to me." He didn't ask what I meant, and I didn't offer. Because the truth was, the necklaces weren't just artifacts anymore. They were a language, and I was fluent now. The next morning, I drove to a local jeweler. I had never done anything like this before. The woman behind the counter was kind, mid-50s, silver hair pulled into a loose braid. I laid the necklaces out on the velvet tray like they were relics. She looked at me with wide eyes. 17? I nodded. "I want to know where they came from," I said. "Anything you can tell me." She examined each one carefully. Her fingers moved with reverence. "This one," she said, holding up Year 13's swallow. "This isn't commercial. It's custom. Probably ordered from a studio, maybe local. See this mark?" She pointed to a tiny etching I had never noticed. A letter. An M. My stomach dropped. "Mara? Do you know who made this?" I asked. She tilted her head. "Looks like Penfield Studios. Boston. Small shop." I swallowed hard. "Thank you." That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed beside him, watching the rise and fall of his chest. This man, this stranger. How many years had I loved him on autopilot? And what would it mean to stop? In the morning, I called the studio. A young voice answered. "Penfield Studios, how can I help you?" I asked about the swallow necklace. The woman paused. "Oh, that's one of Mara's originals. We don't sell it anymore. She only made 5. 5. One of them was mine." "Do you know who ordered them?" I asked. Another pause. "I can't give out client names. I'm sorry." "Of course," I said. "Thank you." I hung up, hands trembling. He hadn't just loved her. He'd immortalized her. He'd worn my years around her neck. That night, I pulled out every necklace and laid them on the floor. Grace walked in. "Mom?" I looked up, startled. I hadn't realized she was home. She stepped closer, kneeling beside me. Her eyes moved across the collection like she was seeing them for the first time. "Are these all from Dad?" I nodded. She reached for the swallow. "This one's pretty." I said nothing. She looked at me. "Why do you look so sad?" I thought of lying, of protecting her. But she was 15 now, old enough to know that sometimes love fractures. I said, "Because I think your dad loved someone else." Her face crumpled. "What? Not instead of me," I said quickly. "Alongside." She was quiet for a long time. Then, "Do you still love him?" I stared at the necklaces, at 17 years of my life strung in gold. "I think I loved who he was," I said, "but I'm not sure who he is anymore." She didn't say anything, just leaned her head on my shoulder. We sat there for a long time. No crying, no shouting, just the truth, finally breathing between us. The next day, I made an appointment with a therapist. Not for him, not for us, for me, because even if I never confronted him, I needed to rebuild the part of me that had been silenced by love. In therapy, I said things I hadn't even written in my notes. I thought the necklaces meant he saw me. I kept them like proof I mattered. I think he gave them to distract me from looking too closely. The therapist nodded, kind-eyed. "And now that you've looked?" I smiled. "I'm still here." I didn't know what I would do next. But for the first time, I knew what I wouldn't do. I wouldn't bury myself beneath gifts. I wouldn't shrink to fit a life someone else curated. I wouldn't pretend not to know. The next time he handed me a box, I would look him in the eyes and ask, "Why?" Not to accuse, but to hear the answer out loud. The morning he gave me the 18th necklace, I didn't open it. I let the box sit untouched on the kitchen counter for 3 full days. He noticed. On the second day, he picked it up and gently turned it in his hand. "Not curious?" he asked. I smiled. "I'm giving it time." He said nothing, but I watched the way his fingers tightened ever so slightly around the box before he set it back down. By then, I had made peace with what I knew. Not forgiveness, not yet, but clarity. There's a kind of freedom in knowing exactly where you stand in someone else's story, even if it's not where you hoped to be. I didn't tell him I had spoken to a therapist. I didn't tell him I'd found the studio that made the necklaces, or that I knew Mara's name. Some truths are best carried quietly until you're strong enough to set them down. Instead, I began asking different kinds of questions. Do you remember what you said when you gave me the first one? I asked over dinner one night. He looked at me across his wine glass. The sapphire. I nodded. He paused, thinking. Something about it reminding me of you. Because I was rare, I said. He smiled. Still are. But something flickered behind his eyes. A shadow. A moment of panic, perhaps. He didn't remember saying that. Not really. And I did. I remembered everything now. What I wore. Where we were. The smell of the cafe down the street. How my hand shook when I untied the ribbon, because I still believed in the magic of small boxes. I wore the sapphire the next day. He didn't comment. I think he was afraid to. Grace noticed. That's the one from when I was little, she said. Yes. Why now? I'm remembering, I told her. She nodded, like she understood. And maybe she did, because Grace had started asking questions too. Not to him, to me. Did you love Dad when you married him? Of course. Did he love you back? That one took longer. I think he did, in the way he could. Is that enough? I looked at her, really looked, this beautiful girl who deserved a world more honest than the one I had inherited. No, I said. Not forever. It was the first time I said it out loud. Not forever. And with that admission, something inside me loosened. That weekend, I drove 3 hours alone to the coast. I told him I needed space. He didn't argue. I packed a small overnight bag, a journal, and one necklace, the gold knot from year 7. I rented a room at a quiet inn by the sea, walked the beach barefoot, wrote for hours. I didn't write about him. I wrote about me, who I had been before the necklaces, before the rituals, before the quiet acceptance that turned into silence. I wrote about the girl who loved used bookstores, who made her own earrings from shells, who once considered moving to Oregon just because the trees made her feel like she could breathe. I wrote about the woman I still might be, and when the sun set, I took the knot necklace and threw it into the ocean. I didn't wait to watch it sink. Some things don't need ceremonies, just release. When I came home, he was waiting at the door. Feel better? He asked. I feel real, I said. That night, I finally opened the 18th box. Inside was a thin gold chain with a single charm, a tiny house, no bigger than a fingernail. He had engraved the back. It said, home. I stared at it for a long time. The irony, the cruelty, or maybe the unknowing hope that he could still buy back comfort. I didn't wear it. I put it with the others, lined it up at the end of the row, a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence I wasn't ready to finish. That night, I began clearing out the guest room. Not for him, for me. Because if I was going to stay, even for now, I needed a place that was mine. My books, my light, my breath. A place where I wasn't someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's obligation, just me. In the days that followed, I moved slowly, reclaiming small spaces, relearning solitude. And in doing so, I started imagining something I hadn't in years. A future, not necessarily alone, but certainly free. There's a difference between staying and returning. After the trip to the coast, I stayed, but something in me had already left. It wasn't visible, not at first. The meals were still cooked, the laundry folded, the small talk maintained. But underneath the rhythm of routine, something had broken clean. I slept in the guest room now. He didn't ask why, and I didn't offer. We moved around each other like dancers in a forgotten choreography. There was no fight, no slammed doors, just absence, heavy and polite. Grace noticed. She didn't say anything, but she lingered longer in doorways, watched us more carefully, the way a child scans a horizon for storms. I didn't lie to her anymore, not out of principle, just exhaustion. She asked one night, "Are you and Dad still together?" I paused, then said, "We're still in the same house." "That's not what I meant." I nodded. "I know." She looked at me for a long time. "Do you still love him?" "I think I love the years." She frowned. "The time we spent, the things we built. But him, I don't know anymore." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "You don't have to stay for me." I felt something crack open, because I had stayed, in part, for her. I had believed the lie that children need intact families more than they need honest ones. But honesty had crept in anyway, like light through worn curtains. That night, I opened the jewelry drawer again, 18 necklaces, arranged like chapters, and I realized something. They were all gifts, but they had never been invitations. He never asked me to choose them, never wondered what I wanted. They were tokens, yes, but of his version of me, not mine. That's what broke me. I wasn't a woman he saw. I was a role he maintained, a place to hang the gold chain of a safe life. I started writing again, really writing, not fragments, not lists, stories. I told myself they were fiction, a woman who discovers her husband's second life, a daughter who watches her mother begin again, a box of necklaces, each holding a secret. They weren't subtle, but they were mine. I printed the pages and kept them in a folder labeled Someday. It was the first time I'd created something just for myself in years. One afternoon, I found the box from year 9 tucked behind a stack of winter scarves. I hadn't remembered moving it. The necklace inside was a locket. I'd never opened it. When I did, I found a photo inside. Not of me, not of Grace, of a woman I didn't recognize, smiling, hair windblown, standing on a cliffside. There was no label, no date, but I knew. This wasn't an accident. I confronted him that night. I didn't yell, didn't even raise my voice. I placed the open locket on the kitchen table and slid it toward him. He looked down, and I saw it. That flicker again. Panic. Recognition. "Where did you find that?" he asked. "Where you left it." He didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he said, "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." He exhaled, looked older suddenly. "She was someone I knew. Before me." "No," he admitted. "During." I felt the words like sand in my teeth. "She didn't mean anything," he said. "It was just, don't," I said. "Don't minimize her. Or me." He was quiet. Then, I didn't know how to stop. I kept thinking it would end. "And the necklaces?" He looked up. I thought if I marked each year, it would still matter. "It did," I said. "Just not the way you meant." That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was angry, because I was done. There's a particular quiet that comes with clarity, the kind that doesn't need noise. The next morning, I booked a cabin for the summer. Just me and Grace. I told him we needed air. He didn't protest. And as I packed, I chose one necklace to bring. The first one. The sapphire. Not because it meant hope, but because it reminded me who I had once been. A woman who still believed gifts meant truth. The cabin sat at the edge of a quiet lake, far enough from town to feel like a different world. Grace and I arrived just before dusk. The air smelled like pine and old wood, and the water lapped gently against the dock, as if welcoming us back to something we'd forgotten. We unpacked slowly, not speaking much. She claimed the loft bedroom. I chose the room with the big window that faced the trees. That first night, we built a fire, roasted marshmallows, and said very little. There was peace in the silence, the kind that doesn't ache, the kind that feels earned. On the second morning, I found a small jewelry dish in the cabin's nightstand, a simple ceramic plate with a cracked edge. I placed the sapphire necklace in the center and left it there. Not as a shrine, not as a relic, just as a reminder. This is where the story began. And now, I get to decide how it continues. Grace adjusted easily to the quiet. She swam in the afternoons, painted with watercolors on the porch, and sometimes lay next to me in bed as we read. One afternoon, she asked if we could talk about the necklaces. "Do you miss them?" she asked. "No," I said, "but I'm grateful for them." She looked confused. I tried to explain. They taught me how to listen, not to him, but to myself, to what I ignored for too long. She nodded slowly. "You think he ever really saw you?" The question cut sharper than I expected. I thought for a moment. I think he saw the version of me that loved him, but not the rest. I shook my head. No, not the full picture. She looked down at her hands. "I don't ever want to become invisible." "You won't," I said. "You already see yourself too clearly." That night, I wrote again. A story about a woman who moves to a cabin and rediscovers the sound of her own breath. It wasn't subtle, but it was mine. I sent it to a literary magazine before I could talk myself out of it. A week later, they replied. They wanted to publish it. I cried. Not because I'd succeeded, but because for the first time in years, I had stepped outside the frame someone else had built around me. The next morning, I walked down to the lake and stood barefoot at the edge of the dock. The water was still. A mirror. I thought of all the things I'd almost said over the years. Almost asked. Almost confronted. Almost walked away from. And I forgave myself for every almost, because surviving is its own kind of courage. Later that evening, Grace brought me a sketch she had made. The lake, the dock, the cabin, and two small figures drawn in silhouette. "We look peaceful," I said. "We are," she replied. We stayed at the cabin for 6 weeks. During that time, I only spoke to him twice. Once when Grace answered his call and handed me the phone. Once when he asked if we were coming back. I told him the truth. I don't know. I didn't owe him certainty anymore. He didn't offer any either. When the summer ended, Grace returned to school. I returned to the house, not to move back in, but to gather what was mine. I packed slowly, not with anger, with intention. Books, clothes, my mother's old baking pans, and the necklaces, all 18 of them. I placed each one in a separate envelope, labeled the year, and left them in his desk drawer with a note. These were never really for me. I'm giving them back to where they came from. Thank you for the years we had. I'm keeping the ones I've chosen for myself. Then I locked the door behind me. Grace and I moved into a small apartment 2 towns over. The windows were drafty, the paint chipped, but the light was perfect. She helped me string up fairy lights. We painted the kitchen yellow. I bought a new jewelry dish. This time, I placed something different inside, a tiny gold necklace with a pen-shaped charm. Grace had given it to me the day we moved in. For your stories, she said. It was the first necklace I'd ever received that wasn't about who someone else thought I was. It was about who I was becoming. Fall arrived slowly, like someone afraid to knock too loudly. The leaves outside our small apartment turned golden, then red, then curled brown at the edges, like pages in an old novel. Grace started painting more, portraits mostly. She said she liked trying to see people as they were, not as they pretended to be. One day, she painted me. I was in the kitchen making tea. She was sitting on the floor near the table, sketching without telling me. When she showed me, I was startled. I looked strong, not young, not soft, but whole. You made me look like someone who knows what she wants, I said. You do, she said, and I almost cried, because it had been so long since I believed that about myself. My writing continued. I published another piece, a quiet essay about learning how to choose silence for peace, not fear. It wasn't a bestseller, but strangers wrote to say, "Thank you for saying what I couldn't." I printed every message and kept them in a shoebox under my bed. Small reminders that truth, once shared, becomes bridge instead of burden. One Thursday afternoon, I received a letter in the mail. Handwritten. No returned address. Inside, a short note on heavy cream paper. I read your story. I recognized the sapphire. I'm sorry. No signature, but I didn't need one. Mara. There was no accusation, no plea, just those 3 sentences. She had read the story, she had known, and somehow she had decided to reach out, not to take, but to release. I didn't write back. There was nothing left to say, but I held the letter for a long time. Strange how healing sometimes arrives, not with explanations, but with acknowledgement. Later that week, I found Grace sitting on the floor, flipping through an old photo album. Do you want to keep these? She asked. She was pointing to pictures of our old house, the dining room, the birthdays, the vacations we took before we stopped touching each other's backs when we passed. I want to keep the parts of me in them, I said, but not all of them. She nodded. We began sorting the album together. Some photos we saved, some we set aside, and some we cut down to the pieces that still mattered. A smile, a hand, a blue sky. We made a collage on the kitchen wall. Not perfect, not chronological, but honest. One morning, I received a call from my lawyer. The divorce papers were ready. I hadn't rushed. There was no rage, no threat, just slow, steady steps toward a different truth. I signed them that afternoon. Grace was at school. The light outside was golden again. I lit a candle, opened the windows, and wore the pen necklace she'd given me. I didn't cry, not out of numbness, but because I no longer needed tears to name what was ending. That night, I made dinner. Roast chicken, sweet potatoes, the same meal I had made the night he gave me the 3rd necklace. I remembered how quiet that dinner had been, how tired I was, how I had convinced myself that the necklace meant, I see you. Now I cooked the same meal for Grace and me. She asked if we could add rosemary this time. I said yes. Halfway through the meal, she looked at me and said, "You seem lighter." I smiled. "I am." After she went to bed, I sat at my small writing desk and looked at the blank page for a long time. Then I wrote the title, The 19th Necklace. And I began. Not about him, not about betrayal, but about what happens after you return to yourself. What it means to take off the gifts someone gave you to keep you distracted and choose instead something you made with your own hands. In the story, the necklace is made of thread, red like the kind used to bind wounds, and it holds no pendant, no weight, just a knot, not the kind that traps, the kind that reminds you something was tied together, then let go. I wrote until the candle burned low, and when I finally stopped, I felt more at home than I ever had in the house we'd once shared. Winter came early that year, not in snow, but in quiet, in the way the cold settled around the windows, how the wind pressed gently at night, like a stranger asking to come in. Grace was thriving. She had joined a local art program. Every week, she came home with paint on her hands and stories in her eyes. "I feel like I'm finally using the right part of my brain," she told me once. I knew exactly what she meant. I'd submitted The 19th Necklace to a literary anthology. They accepted it with a handwritten note from the editor. "I don't usually cry while reading. Thank you for this." I read that line over and over, not because I needed the validation, but because for the first time, my pain had become something useful, something beyond survival. One day in mid-December, I received a voicemail. It was from him. His voice sounded tired, measured. "I found the envelopes, the necklaces. I understand. I think I always did. If you ever want to talk, I'm here." I didn't call back, not out of cruelty, but because I didn't need to anymore. Closure, I had learned, isn't always a conversation. Sometimes it's the silence that stays kind. Still, the message lingered with me through the day. So I did something I hadn't done in months. I went for a walk through our old neighborhood. The streets were the same hedges, same cracked sidewalk near the post office. But something in me had shifted. I passed the house, our old house. Lights were on, a wreath on the door. Through the window, I saw the dining room. Someone else lived there now. I didn't feel sad, just still, like watching the past in motion without needing to rewind. I walked further, letting the cold sting my cheeks, my fingers buried deep in my coat. I carried one necklace in my pocket, the thinnest one, year 12. The year I had stopped sleeping beside him and told myself it was because of the snoring. I took it out and held it in my hand for a moment. Then I left it hanging on the branches of a winter tree in the park. No ceremony, just release. The next day, Grace and I bought a small Christmas tree for our apartment. We didn't have many ornaments, so we made our own. Tiny paper stars, bits of twine, dried orange slices. Grace crafted a topper out of wire and beads. "It's abstract," she warned. "It's perfect," I said. We drank cocoa and watched snow fall outside our window. She asked, "What are you going to write next?" I smiled. "Maybe something about women who start over. Happy or sad?" "Both," I said, "but mostly real." She nodded. "I'd read that." The next morning, I received a small brown envelope in the mail. No return address again. Inside was a single charm, a tiny silver bell. No note, no explanation, just that. It could have been from him, from Mara, or from no one at all. I didn't care. I strung it on a new chain, not gold, not heavy, just simple. I wore it to the store that afternoon. No one noticed it but me, and that was enough. Later that week, I ran into someone from our old life, a woman named Linda who used to live 2 houses down. She blinked when she saw me. "Susan?" I nodded. "Oh my God, I wasn't sure. You look different." "I feel different," I said. She hesitated. "I heard about the divorce." Of course she had. People always do. "I hope you're okay." "I am." She smiled. "Well, good for you. You always seemed—" She trailed off. I waited. She never finished the sentence, but I knew what she meant. I always seemed together, quiet, accepting. I had been, until I wasn't. That night, I journaled until midnight, not to process, not to heal, but just because I could, because words were mine again, because stories no longer hurt to touch, because there's a joy in writing once the pain becomes background music instead of the main score. And in that joy, I found something I hadn't expected. Gratitude, not for the betrayal, but for the unraveling, because I had followed the thread and found myself on the other side. Spring arrived without asking permission. The mornings got brighter. Our apartment windows stayed open longer. And on one of those afternoons, filled with wind and birdsong, I stopped noticing the space where the necklaces used to be. It wasn't an event. It was just a shift, like a body remembering how to stretch. Grace had entered a new phase, less talkative, more inward. I let her be. Teenage girls grow like wildflowers, beautifully, unpredictably, and often out of your line of sight. She still left notes for me sometimes, on the fridge, on my desk. One said, "You're doing great." It was taped above my keyboard now, next to my favorite quote. "Sometimes you climb out of the wreckage, and it's quieter than you imagined." I was writing more than ever. One story became 3. 3 became a small book. I called it The Things We Wear, a collection of essays and short stories about the things we carry in silence. I submitted it to a small press, expecting nothing. They emailed back with 2 words: "We're interested." I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Not because I was surprised, but because I had stopped needing to be seen. And somehow, that made me more visible than ever. When I told Grace, she hugged me and said, "About time." I laughed. "You always believe in me too much." "No," she said, "just enough." That weekend, I got a message from him. Not a call, not a letter, just a photo. It was a close-up of a necklace. Year 11, the bird pendant, resting in his open palm, no caption. I looked at it for a long moment, then deleted it. Some things don't need a response. I didn't feel anger or longing, just a soft finality, like closing a door that had already stayed open too long. 2 days later, I was invited to speak at a local women's group. Topic: Reclaiming yourself after the story you thought was forever ends. I almost said no. Then I remembered the woman I used to be, the one who sat at a kitchen table with 17 necklaces and no voice. I said yes. The room was small, 30 women, maybe more, some young, some older, all watching me like they were waiting to be given permission. So I told them what I had needed to hear. You don't need a reason to start over. You don't need proof to leave. You don't need anyone to tell you your pain counts. I told them about the necklaces, the notes, the silence that grew louder than truth. I told them how I once measured love in gifts because I was afraid to measure it in actions. And how, when I finally stopped, I realized I'd been living next to someone, not with them. Afterward, a woman hugged me and whispered, "You gave me back something I didn't know I'd lost." I walked home in the dark, smiling, not because it was all better, but because it was real. One morning, near Grace's birthday, she asked if I had any of the necklaces left. "Just one," I said. "The sapphire?" I nodded. "Can I see it?" I brought it out, not in a velvet box, but in a small ceramic bowl beside my bed. She held it gently. "It's beautiful," she said. "It was the first," I replied. She looked at me, then down at the charm. "Does it still hurt?" I thought for a moment. "No," I said. "It reminds me who I was when I still believed in magic." "Do you still?" "In different kinds." She handed it back. "You should write that into something." "I just might." On the day she turned 17, the same number as the necklaces, I gave her a chain. It was thin, silver, with a small, open circle. "No gems?" she teased. "No distractions," I said. She smiled and put it on. "It's light. It should be." That night, I watched her fall asleep, the silver glinting faintly in the lamplight. And I realized something. Maybe we never stop wearing stories. We just learn how to choose which ones we keep close and which ones we finally, quietly, let go.